Welcome to The Authentic Spiritual Journey, a weekly podcast featuring real and practical spiritual conversations from diverse perspectives here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. Today, episode 227, The Zen Executive with Reverend Jim Blake. And now your host, Reverend Cynthia Alice Anderson.
Hello and welcome to The Authentic Spiritual Journey. My name is Cynthia Alice Anderson. I am the host. I'm here today in 818 Studios with my producer.
Good morning, everybody. This is Dave Croft. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of The Authentic Spiritual Journey. And as always, I want to welcome you to a brand new week. And I hope you're doing well. Hope your fall is doing well. We're turning the corner into November.
Are we in fall?
We are in fall.
It's hard to tell in Florida, Dave.
Oh, I know. Geez, 90 degrees and into months that end in burr should not have any temperatures in the 90s. See what I did? That's a dad joke for you.
That's a dad joke. Yep. That's a groaner.
Yeah.
Well, today is a great day, Dave. We have a very special guest in with us from Kansas City, CEO of Unity Village. Reverend Jim Blake is here, so it's going to be a great day. So, Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome.
It is my pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. And Dave and I always talk about the seasons for some reason. And we always like to say a happy Monday, right? Because the show downloads every Monday. Thank you, friends. We are all around the world already now in over 90 countries, right at 200,000 downloads. Some amazing guests coming forward, too, before the end of the year. And Reverend Jim is one of those. It excites me to know that Reverend Jim is at the helm at Unity Village, really providing some conscious leadership and, as we like to say, enlightened leadership. And Jim, I'm just going to jump in because I believe that's the future of business, is enlightened leadership. And I'm happy you're here to talk about your book, The Zen Executive. I'll hold it up for our friends online. Of course, we'll have links to the show notes and all that. But I'm happy to have you, Jim, because I think what you're doing in the book is really important. I think in business, traditionally, there's been the idea that business and spirituality are super separate. And what your book does is really shows us that spiritual awareness, leading with kindness and compassion is actually good for the bottom line, right? Because people feel empowered, they feel heard, and this leads to a healthy work culture.
Indeed, and you hit all the high points right there. So great introduction, and I agree with you. I think, much like everything that's come out of the pandemic, it's time for a pretty significant shift in the way leadership and corporate culture is done.
Yeah,
it was started some time ago in Silicon Valley. They started to embrace things like meditation and nap pods and things of that nature. And so my hope is that with this book and some of the work that you're doing and that we're all doing, we can make a greater inroads into the larger corporate culture, because I think it's healthy for all of us in terms of individuals, leaders, and then, as you mentioned, it's very healthy for culture and the bottom line if people will give it a chance.
Yes, I mean, I think you're exactly right. And it's interesting, the timing of all this, because I'm meeting with a really incredible business leader later this week, just to get his input on a couple programs I'm putting together. And what I'm finding is some of the largest corporations in the country now are embracing this idea. So I'm excited to see in 5 years, in 10 years, where we are as a culture. But before we get, super into that, I want our listeners to get to know you a little bit, Jim, because when you hold a position like you do, which is, it's an important position, it provides support to millions of people around the world in terms of what we do at Unity Village, the prayer ministry based in affirmative prayer, the, retreat facility, the hotel and golf center. But, I think when people see somebody like you in a position like that, they might make up stories about how you got there. And, you didn't just wake up one morning and were a CEO, that there's a story, right?
Sure.
There's a story behind that. So tell us a little bit about how you got started, because in your book, you talked about your humble beginnings, and I loved that part of your book. That was actually my favorite part of your book.
Yeah, so it was a long and winding road. As you saw in the book, I did come from very humble beginnings, lower middle class. No one in my family had ever been to college.
Yeah.
And my family wasn't particularly religious. And so, some people are interested in then how did you become the leader of a 100-year-old spiritual nonprofit? And so, the only thing my mom was religious about was putting me on a Sunday school bus to the local Baptist Sunday school. So that was my first
yes.
encounter with religion. And Baptist, or at least back then, it was a lot of fire and brimstone. And so I spent a lot of time in my formative years sort of being afraid, to do anything wrong. And
right. Fear of God, right?
Yeah. And so once I became, 11 or 12 and that program ended, I sort of lost touch with any sort of religious path until I got to college. Mm-hmm. And I had my first world religions course, and it just sort of took the top off for me, blew my mind. I was just struck by sort of the golden thread of truths that ran through all of the religions and the beauty that could be found in each of them. And so that sort of flipped the seeker switch on for me. And in addition to my pursuit of a computer science undergrad, I sort of really began to become interested in all the different world religions. And so that put me on a path to study things like Buddhism and Hinduism. I did a lot of work developing my own yoga practice and studying the 8-limb path of yoga. And,
I forgot about that.
So I ended up getting my graduate degree in my undergrad in computer science. I went to work in the corporate world, and I had to compartmentalize the two, right? So I had my corporate persona and what I was trying to do there, and then on the side and in the evenings, I had my spiritual pursuits. Mm. And I guess what I would say is over time, that compartmentalization was not working for me. I was working in organizations where the culture was unhealthy and leadership was done through fear and intimidation.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, and I was expected to also lead that way. So I was starting into leadership. And I can tell you that it didn't feel good to me to lead that way and to set some of the pressures and expectations we had on people and the way people were treated. And so over time, I just slowly began to incorporate what I was learning and believing from a spiritual perspective into my corporate leadership practice in terms of how we treat people and how we show up.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it led to me saying, okay, this stuff works, and let me put it in a book to maybe help some other people find a path that will resonate with them so that they can coexist in integrity with themselves in both environments, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think that's very well put. And that's what I was hearing. We were talking about, the kind of traditional corporate rat race, which is fear and intimidation. And the number one thing I've heard from managers and CEOs, that people today are so concerned about covering, well, everybody calls it CYA, instead of being authentic and, transparent, everybody's trying to look like they know what they're doing, even if they're making mistakes left and right. There's a lack of integrity because everybody's so worried about getting fired. That's the fear and intimidation played out among the employees. And so when the managers, are moving into more of what you're talking about, it creates a completely different culture. And I think people just are more empowered when they're not led with fear and intimidation. I mean, no one operates well that in that environment. That's called a trauma response, right?
Yeah, you are spot on. And so that I talk a lot about that in the book. Is just that. I think the new leadership paradigm calls for a certain level of self-awareness and really understanding the influence we have as leaders. And so even as individuals, if you're not in a leadership role, but the influence is just what you talked about. So if I'm leading through fear and intimidation and just cracking my team all the time, so they're operating in a state of anxiety and anxiousness, right? They're afraid to ask any questions. They're certainly not going to contribute to any innovation because they don't want to feel, stupid or make a mistake. But here's the tough part. That doesn't stay at the office. they're driving home in that anxious state. They're worried.
Correct.
They're worried about work or what's going to happen the next day. This is why there are so many heart attacks. The stats say there's more heart attacks on Monday than any other day because people are afraid to go back to work. And so that's impacting your family life. It could be impacting you on the way home in a road rage incident, take it out on pets. So look at it conversely. If you're providing a culture and a leadership style that uplifts someone, that allows them to feel seen and heard, where they feel cared for, where they feel nurtured, and that they have the resources and things they do to not only do their job, but to be their best selves, now you've created the opposite. Now people are going home content, satisfied, feeling like they've done some good work. And they show up in the world that way. Instead of showing up anxious and stressed, now they're showing up fulfilled and content, and they create a ripple effect of that through their family and society. And so there's a great deal of responsibility that we hold as leaders, that if we really understand it, we can change the world just through a leadership style, whether it's a large team, small team, or just you as an individual.
Yes, I mean, I think that's exactly true. I think also you mentioned an important word, which was innovation, and innovation is such a creative aspect to any workplace. There's a workshop I do in the corporate sector. It's copyrighted. It's called, I'm saying that out loud because we're online. I've had people tell me things about material they've used. So, and one of my workshops and keynotes is called Intention, Innovation, and Motivation. And I talk about the power of intention just going into any meeting, any setting, any meeting with an employee, any meeting where you're setting a presentation, like the power of intention before making a difficult phone call to a supplier, the power of intention when, having a difficult conversation with an employee who's not showing up. Just simply being conscious that we have the power to choose how we're going to show up in that, in my experience, creates huge innovation in terms of creative ways to solve problems. Just a little bit of self-awareness.
Yeah, 100% agree. The intentionality is extremely important. And just creating the opening, as you mentioned, the space, allowing for space for there to be innovation will often lead to some great inroads in terms of fresh ideas and inspiration.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things, that keeps coming forward in my work in this regard, and this, my very first workshop I did this is like the late 90s, was called Stand in Your Magnificence. And I gave the workshop as much for me as the people I was giving it to. I don't think I knew that at the time. But really, that's some of the work I do with actors and actresses, for them to really just know their own magnificence as they go into, an audition. But it's also really carried over into the corporate work. It's hard to feel like a capable leader if you think you're fundamentally flawed. But if you believe, right, that you're fundamentally magnificent, if you think you have a gift to give to the people around you, you're not trying to prove everything. You're not trying to CYA all the time. What you're trying to do is engage and inform and lift up. So this is what keeps coming forward in my work right now.
Well, let me just applaud you for doing that work, because one of the most important things I think for all of us is this idea of self-acceptance. For so many years,
totally.
Personally, for so many years, as I mentioned, I was conforming to the leadership styles of the corporate world, conforming to their expectations, and it didn't resonate with me. And so it left me feeling out of balance. And it also left me feeling less than, like, what's wrong with me?
Exactly.
That I'm not like them. And over time, and with my own development of sort of self-awareness and really looking at some hard truths about myself, what's working, what's not working, what do I like, what do I don't like, what am I afraid of? When you really begin to examine that and you get to know yourself, you can get to a place where you begin to understand that, and this, I want everybody to hear this, your uniqueness is your superpower. The whole point of our existence is that we're all very different. And it's those differences that are the most powerful. And so when we can learn, as you mentioned, to embrace that and really be comfortable with that, and know that you don't have to conform, and know that you can be different, and just be okay with whatever criticisms or feedback come back, you'll be so much more happy, so much more productive. And oh, by the way, I would say the synchronicities and the possibilities that emerge from that because you're aligned with your true self that emerge are almost miraculous. And so I'm so glad to hear that you're doing that work, because I think it's foundational, right? You have to be right. Leadership or any kind of expression is an inside job. And so you really have to be right inside for the expression outside to be that which you're trying to achieve. So great job by you, and thank you for doing that work.
Well, I think we're in alignment, and I love to know that Unity Village, where I was educated, is being run in this way, because even Unity Village, even though it's been a spiritual organization, has been through a lot of derivations of leadership and has grown and evolved as well. And so I love that that's where we're heading. I think, I think, as you call it, our over 100-year-old spiritual nonprofit has been blessing the world in ways that's almost like we're kind of like undercover agents for God. And I want to quit being so undercover. Right. And I think it could be a tremendous, I think it is, but I think it could be even more a tremendous hub for leaders of companies, not only from the U.S., but from around the world, because of the intention with which it started, that it was going to be a sanctuary of peace for everyone. It wasn't about a single religion. It wasn't even about a single teaching. It was about acknowledging the goodness in everyone, lifting that up, celebrating that. And I think that's what you're about, and you've been desiring to do and have been doing, in fact, at Unity Village. So I applaud you for that as well. And I think we are moving into a new era, just in Unity as a whole.
Yeah, thank you. People forget often that the co-founder, Charles Fillmore, was a wildly successful businessman.
Totally.
Before he expanded into this spiritual pursuit. And what keeps people as leaders from embracing this type of leadership? So they hear it and they go, "Oh, Jim, my folks would just walk all over me if I lead that way," or
I've heard that too.
Can't hold people accountable if you're being nice. And my argument would be there's two things. First of all, you're not holding people accountable. You're just doing it in a humane way. You can have a humane conversation that's about facts and data, that says, "Hey, listen, here's what I need to have us doing. We're not achieving that. So what can we do to get to a place where we are achieving that?" Right? That's simple. It's humane. We're having a dialogue, and you're still holding someone accountable. The second big fear is that it won't work, that it's not successful. And what I would say is I've been doing this now in my corporate career for a really long time. I started with small groups, and they increasingly grew. This was my first opportunity to do it organization-wide. And what I will tell you is it's more productive. We're doing more with less people than we've ever done in this organization. And
I'm sure it's true.
And to your point, everything that was once shrinking because of the lack of innovation and sort of stagnant activity that was here has now changed. And now we're reaching more people across every single one of our channels: books, booklets, websites, social media. Now, I also say we changed our focus, like you said earlier.
Sure.
We made our intention to help and serve more people. And so with that as the backdrop, and then an environment where people feel supported and empowered and no fear that this isn't going to work, it just creates a really good formula for success.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I've always thought that about Charles Fillmore, that gets lost sometimes in our story. And it's one of the reasons we have Unity Village. I mean, the forward thinking of, I would often have people come into town because I moved to Kansas City like a year before starting ministerial school, and was there several years after as well, because I, worked in the retreat department there. And I worked right down the hall from Rosemary Fillmore Ray, which was a real gift, to get to know her, and James Dillett Freeman, and all those people. But I would walk people around the grounds and say, "Look, this was started like in the Depression, like look at what's here, and the forward thinking that caused this to be. Like, it was totally a self-supporting farm with its own water source, with the tunnels for inclement weather. I mean, nobody was thinking that way in that time. And I think it is wonderful that we're getting back to that. The first Montessori school in the country was at Unity Village. Right? I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, we are struck by the same things because, as you mentioned, it was in the late 1920s when this whole initiative started. And for those of you that aren't aware, Unity Village is a 1,200-acre campus. It's got a stunning courtyard fountain with about 9 buildings. It's all Italian architecture with red tile roofs.
Yeah.
2 fishing lakes, walking trails, beautiful prayer gardens and prayer chapels all over campus, state-of-the-art hotel, golf course, now some Airbnbs where we transform some 100-year-old cottages into Airbnbs. So it's really a spiritual retreat center, sacred environment that's been here for 100 years. But to your point, Cynthia, it started out, they purchased one farm.
Yeah.
One little farm. And that particular parcel in the village as a whole turned 100 years old a year and a half ago. And then as time progressed, and Charles being the real estate genius that he was, he just added and added and added. And now you have this 1,200-acre expression that we have today. And
Well, yeah, and it's a beautiful campus. I mean, when I was in school, I would walk that lake trail nearly every day. It's like, is it 2.5 or 3.5 miles? I can't remember all the way around. I'd take my dog out there. Beautiful. You'd see, wild turkey and fox and deer and beautiful creeks. So I can't say enough about the physical land. And, in Unity, we believe everything's holy. And I think the land there, because it's been just, the land itself is sacred. And then with all that sacred activity, as soon as you drive onto the campus, you get the sense of, oh, wow, this is a special place.
Yeah, 128 years of prayer activity, continuous prayer activity.
Yes.
In a particular area certainly seems to change the energy frequency, and you can feel it, like you mentioned, when you drive upon campus.
Yes. And for those of you who don't know about Silent Unity, I mean, I can't say enough about the work of Silent Unity as well. And basically, no matter where you are or what your need is, you can call anytime and get prayer support. And, at the new ministry where I am, Unity North Tampa, we do send financial gifts because we want to make sure that stays there. And so what people don't realize is that Unity basically has continued forward by the generosity of donors from around the world. And so we want to lift that up as well. If you like what you're hearing today, as much as we appreciate your support on this show, we know there's enough for everyone. And we want to say, we want to see Unity Village continue. So if you feel moved, definitely go check out. And Jim, is the best website just unity.org for them to go?
It's a brand new website. It's just been redone. In fact, we've restructured the entire site.
I noticed that.
Mm-hmm. The entire really front page is about tools and resources to help you with the reality of practical everyday issues. So there are resources on grief and prosperity and addiction and becoming a caregiver, peaceful passing. So just really anything that you would face in your day-to-day life, there are spiritual tools and resources in the form of magazines and podcasts and booklets and articles there to support you. And as you mentioned, the prayer ministry, when you call for prayer or write for prayer, that request is handled, of course, in the moment. But then it's put in a prayer vigil chapel where it's held for 30 days. And there are people continuously holding vigil in that chapel, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, which is why we mentioned earlier that it's the grounds here are sort of saturated in prayer because there is constant vigil happening all the time.
Yes, absolutely true. And I'm glad you mentioned, the practical aspect, right? I heard it said, this is probably about 25 years ago, that the first time I heard a minister say this, and it was Reverend Greg Barrett, who's been a minister, 40 years. He said, in Unity, we're not going to tell you what to think, but how. And I like that. In other words, we're not going to force you to believe a certain thing. What we're going to do is give you tools for how to live a better life, a more prosperous life, an abundant life, a life on purpose, a life of peace, a life of joy. And there's a lot of freedom in that. And Jim, I know that's what you're trying to bring into. I just want to bring it back to this, to bring into business everywhere, not just at spiritual centers, but to understand that these kind of teachings, no matter what your church affiliation, this will support and enlighten and even develop some of those other spiritual teachings you may already be working with, because these are spiritual ideas. This isn't religious dogma, right?
No, these, in fact, the reason the co-founders landed on the name Unity is because they felt like they took the ancient spiritual principles from all of the world's religions and combined them into the teachings and principles of unity. And co-founders were often quoted as saying, these principles will help a Buddhist become a better Buddhist, or
exactly.
And so whatever your path, certainly we are accepting of that, and these tools and principles apply. And so, for instance, you mentioned it directly when you talk about how to think. And so, one of the core principles at Unity is understanding the relationship between your thoughts and emotions and how that impacts your experience of the world. And so,
yes,
learning how to control those and change those using affirmations and things of that nature to really enhance your experience of what's happening in the world around you.
Yes. And for those of you who may not know, we talk about this from a spiritual standpoint, but science and even medicine are now already proving what it is we've been teaching for over 100 years. And that study of medicine is called psychoneuroimmunology. I just met a gal the other day who said, I have a doctorate in that. And I was like, you do? I said, I didn't know they had one in that. So you're educating me. But this is the idea that science is now proving what we believed and known spiritually for a very long time. And this is not even new with Unity. This has been known in some of the oldest religions in the world, right? Which is Hinduism and Buddhism. And both of those teachings teach the law of cause and effect, right? In other words, whatever I focus on, that's what I get more of. Whatever energy I put out is the energy I get back. And that's what we're speaking of.
Indeed. And like you said, that's one of the things that you mentioned it earlier, the founders and some of the innovative things they did with the property. But I'm also struck by just what you said. I mean, some of these principles are 2,000 years old, and then
right.
bringing them to the West in just the last, 100 years, they were so far ahead of their time. And to now have science really reflecting back that indeed your thoughts and emotions not only impact your body, but impact your experience. And so anyway, it's really remarkable just how ahead of their time they were 100 years ago, over 100 years ago.
Yes, very true. Well, and we are under the umbrella of what's called New Thought. And I often will work with a church or a leader in a church. And I say, well, just remember, we're in New Thought. So it's a good idea to have one. So let's not get stuck in only what was done in the past, because it's a new day. We also have information now psychologically that the co-founders of Unity did not have. And so as much as I, in my work and in my ministry, and, as much as I teach these same principles everywhere, there's also new information about shadow and about self-awareness that the founders didn't know. So as I see it, we're honoring, and you are too, Jim, honoring the work of the founders, but evolving. And that's the three words that you see on my website over and over and over are these three: grow, prosper, evolve. And this is what I believe we're doing with our teachings. We are evolving them to apply today, but also honoring, those ancient sacred truths. So, friends, I hope you're receiving a lot out of this today with Reverend Jim. And Jim, I wanted you to know that this show is airing on today, which is United Nations Day, October 21st. And I wanted to do it on that specific day because of how unity historically has been a place of peace, a place of comfort, a place of inspiration, for all people, all nations, everywhere. So, I thank you for your time today. And Jim, anything you want to tell us about what's coming up next for you in terms of your book, The Zen Executive, or your speaking? What can we expect to hear from you coming forward soon?
Well, I've actually, so the book's only been out since May. So I've been doing a lot of these sorts of events with a lot of folks. And then I've just learned recently that some people are asking for some supporting materials so they can begin to teach some of these principles in leadership type courses. And so we've begun the exploration of putting together a workbook as well as some keynote talking points for people that want to go and spread the word about this type of leadership and some of the things contained in the book. So we'll be spending some time on that over the next half a year, as well as, just the same thing you're doing, going around and speaking and helping people to understand and be able to embrace this new paradigm for leadership.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're doing is super important. Again, Reverend Jim Blake's book, The Zen Executive, and that subtitle is Gems of Wisdom for Enlightened Leadership. And friends, this is our hope that no matter, where you are or what work you may find yourself doing, that you bring these spiritual principles into everyday life, right? The practical application, that you grow, that you prosper, you evolve. And we thank you for trusting us with your journey. We're honored to be a part of your journey, and we thank you so much for your financial support. Every month, that there's some of you that give $2 a month, and some that give $100, and we just thank you for that, because it is your dedication to us that keeps us on the air. So we thank you for your generosity. And Reverend Jim Blake, CEO of Unity Village, thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope to have you again. And dear listeners, thank you, and blessings on the journey, dear friend.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Authentic Spiritual Journey here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. This channel is made possible because of listeners just like you. If you would like to support the channel with your tax-deductible contribution on an ongoing basis or through a one-time gift, head over to experienceofthesoul.com/support. The Authentic Spiritual Journey is copyright 2022, Cynthia Alice Anderson, all rights reserved. Our theme music is composed by Dave Croft and used with permission from RR Hot Publishing. The Experience of the Soul podcast channel is a production of 818 Studios.